This particular experience was not as obviously life-threatening, but was a doozy of a night, y'all. I'll let you be the judge. And sorry for formatting on mobile. Background: this happened about 7 years ago. I'm female, 5'2" and petite, so I try to be extra careful because I've had some pretty close calls. This night I clearly had a lapse in judgment. Also, I don't do hard drugs, but during my college years I drank a fair amount and smoked copious amounts of marijuana. Presenting: my date from hell. I waited tables for 7 years, working my way through college. I served all kinds of people during that time, and grew very comfortable working with the general public, playing up small talk, putting on a friendly demeanor, and more importantly, waiting the hell out of some tables. I was good at my job, so I enjoyed my work most of the time aside from the occasional douchebag customer. My restaurant was right off the highway, next to several large hotels. Most ran between $90 to $150 a night. Not the worst, not the best. I'd often get tables who were staying at these hotels whom would walk over for a meal more than one night in a row if they were staying longer than one day. This is how I met Bob. Bob came in on a busy night, sat quietly by himself, and required minimal effort. He ordered only cobbler and coffee, which he ate quickly. I sent him on his way, to go coffee in hand, with very minimal small talk. I noticed he smiled at me, eyes lingering a bit longer than normal, and immediately knew he was interested in me. Most women know the look. Despite this, he left without saying anything else, and I thought that was the end of it. He also left me a fat tip. Since he had a small order, it was almost 90% gratuity. Hell yeah. The next night at work, he's back. He's requested my section this time. Again, orders modestly, no actual meal. Leaves a great tip, but barely says more to me than the few words it takes to place his order. Cool. Minimal effort. Maximum reward. I dig it. We repeat this 3 nights in a row, until finally at the end of night 3 he opens up and tells me a bit about himself. He is staying at the hotel next door for his job working on cell phone towers and telephone poles. He will be in the area for several months. He shows me pictures on his phone of him in gear at the top of very high towers, and his story seems to check out. He wraps all this info up by asking for my phone number. I did find him relatively attractive. Not crazy good looking, but he had a nice smile. He was barrel-chested, a big dude, with curly hair that was shaggy but nice. The kinds of curls women pay big money for, I thought. I was a bit lonely at the time, and he seemed normal, so I agreed to give him my number. Over the next few days we made small talk, but nothing substantial. Looking back, aside from his employment, I learned almost nothing about Bob during this conversation period. Nothing that sticks with me anyways. It was all meaningless small talk via TXT. Finally, I agreed to grab a drink with him on 4th of July weekend, and having no prior plans for the holiday, I was excited to have something to do. Usually I would have insisted I meet him somewhere public to protect myself, but I had been interacting with him for over a week, so my guard was dropping. Stupid, right? He suggested we smoke prior to hitting the bar. I liked this idea, and not wanting to go to his hotel room for obvious reasons, I reluctantly agree my place would probably be best since it's closer to downtown. I give him my apt information. My 1-bedroom apartment where I live alone. This was stupid of me. The night arrives and he's punctual. Both of us have some weed. We are very well supplied. It's important to mention, I am also a very experienced smoker and had lots of different methods for us to choose from. Pipes, steamrollers, papers, blunt wraps, ECT. I ask his preferred method, and he says bong. Of course, the one thing I don't have. Mine had recently broken. I tell him so and suggest a blunt or a bowl, but he insists he wants a bong rip. I tell him I don't know where we'd get a bong this late. He insists he knows where and must have a bong rip, so I allow him to ferry me to a shadier gas station in the area, where he purchases not only a large glass bong, but also a grinder and lighter, even though I have us well supplied at the home. We return. He gets his bong hit. I find that whole thing odd, but brush it off and enjoy my buzz. Bob has me roll a joint after several bong hits. I finish and go to light it, and he stops me. Let's smoke that on the way to the bar, he says. I live less than a 10-minute drive from the bars and tell him so. I also tell him that it's a holiday weekend, so cops will be out in full force, and that I think we should just play it safe. He steamrolls my objections and insists everything will be fine, and I'm worrying for nothing. I tell him I'm not comfortable with it, and he just repeats himself. Red flag. Apparently, I have no choice in the matter, so we leave and head to the bar's joint a burnin'. We arrive safely. Bob parks in a very obvious pay-to-park lot. These lots are heavily patrolled by tow companies, but are usually only staffed by an automatic kiosk machine where you can pay. However, since it was a holiday weekend, there was an actual person attendant as well. Bob parks, and we begin to walk toward the bar, making no move toward the machine to pay. I warn him this lot is heavily towed, but he once again steamrolls over my warning and tells me it'll be fine. FYI, I knew this would not be fine. He would 100% get towed if he didn't pay before we went inside. The parking attendant comes jogging over to us trying to get our attention, as I try unsuccessfully to convince him paying is not optional. But he never stops walking. Finally, the attendant neared us enough to say in our direction, "Hey man, you gotta pay to park or you'll get towed." Without an ounce of humor in his voice, cold, chilling, and completely unlike anything I'd heard come out of his mouth all night, he replied just loudly enough to be heard by the man, "If I get towed, I'll fucking stab you." What the actual fuck? My legs almost give out in shock. My brain clicks that I may be in danger. The parking attendant mutters something about towing and walks off. I decided right then and there that he is definitely not my ride anymore. All bets are off because he just threatened to stab the parking attendant. I needed to ditch him. Somehow. Safely. I take a step away, putting distance between us, but keep pace with him as we walk toward a bar. I ask, "What the fuck was that?" "You know you're definitely getting towed now that you threatened that guy." "B, I was just joking." "M, you didn't say it like a joke." And he definitely didn't laugh. "B, it wasn't serious." I let him know that I didn't like his behavior. Now in an increasingly crowded area, the witnesses made me bolder. I developed a plan in my head, hoping I could discreetly phone a cab from the ladies' room and run for it, using the crowd as cover. He knew where I lived, no fixing that, but hopefully his car being towed would slow him down a bit. Bob continued to insist it had all been one big hilarious joke as we entered bar 1, that I'd misunderstood, that I couldn't take a joke. I knew better. His voice had been deadly serious and ice cold. My instincts told me he had been serious about his threat. I continued planning my escape in my head while he testified his innocence. I'd need to bide my time till the right moment, so I waited, uncomfortably and suddenly aware of how he'd been acting erratically all night, and I was just now noticing. I feel my gut twist inside me. I was scared now, and I felt like an idiot for brushing off the other warning signs. He clearly wasn't balanced. But if he'd wanted to kill me, you'd think he'd already have done it, right? In the safety of my one-bedroom apt, right? I hung my hopes on this thought. We enter bar 1. It's obvious I'm miffed by the encounter in the parking lot. He never did pay, and Bob seems annoyed by this. Bob puts a card down on the bar and starts a tab. We order drinks. I take mine directly from the bartender and watch it like it's my fucking job. Bob fiddling with his phone when suddenly he grunts in annoyance. Its battery has died. NBD, right? No. He proceeds to tell me that he was in the middle of transferring money between his accounts when his phone died, that he was putting money on the card that the bartender was holding for our tab, but since his battery died before he was finished, there is no money on that card. I immediately offered to pay for the drinks. He could take back his card. I'd pay cash, NBD. Already I just wanted the night to be over. B, there's an ATM in bar 2, right across the street. I can get cash there. I don't want you to pay. We can go to bar 2 really quickly. We don't even have to close out this tab. We will just come right back and pay it. I've been inside bar 2 many times. I am way more comfortable there than in bar number 1. I'm even friends with one of the barbacks, so I'm hoping perhaps he can help me escape my nightmare date as gracefully as possible with minimal risk. I send up a silent prayer he's working tonight and agree wholeheartedly to just dip right on out of their tab unpaid, debit card left behind. He's coming right back to pay anyways, right? We go to bar 2. The ladies' room is right next to the ATM, and as he's using it, I never actually saw if he successfully got cash or not. I excuse myself and slip into the ladies' room. I must be the luckiest chick in the world because my friend Heather, bless her soul, came stumbling out of a stall behind me as I was staring hopelessly into the mirror above the sinks, silently cursing my own stupidity and wishing I anywhere else but in my current predicament. I was saved. Relief washed over me in a wave, and I ran into her arms and hugged her violently, telling her all about my weird date, how he'd been erratic all night and threatened to stab the parking attendant not 30 minutes ago in this creepy voice. And most importantly, how I didn't want him to drive me home anymore, how I just wanted to get away but needed a ride. Heather turned out to be out with her husband and his friends, some of I knew. We made a plan. She'd walk with me to their table, and I'd sit with them. They'd keep an eye on me as I explained to Bob that I wasn't feeling a connection and wanted to finish the rest of the night out with my friends. They'd keep me safe and drive me home later. We planned the whole speech, but I never had to use it. I walked out the bathroom door, and he was gone. I didn't see him again that night, nor did he text me. Heather filled everybody in, and the guys were real sweet about it, putting me in the center seat, so I was obscured from view mostly by passerbys. A sick feeling in my gut tells me he stuck around and watched me join the boys at Heather's table, and maybe even sit extra low in my chair. My friends took me all the way to my door that night after the bars, making sure I was safely inside. Abandoned on my coffee table was the glass bong, brand new grinder, and lighter Bob had insisted upon buying, paid probably $60 for, then took maybe 3 hits off. The worst part was when I walked into my bathroom after kicking off my heels, having just got home. I noticed a small glass thing on the side of my bathtub, which I noticed as I sat on the toilet to pee. I picked it up. It was about the size of a tube of lip balm, but fatter and rounder. When I inspected it closely, I found a thimble full of loose white powder on the inside. It seemed to be contained to one side, while the other half was empty and had a hole on top. I examined it closely. I was pretty sure it was Coke, but I'd never seen anything like that little glass contraption before. Realizing Bob had used my bathroom and it had to be his, I freaked out thinking that he'd surely come back for his drugs if he left them behind on accident. He never did though, and I tucked away the glass powder-filled thing out of paranoia deep in my closet, afraid if he did return for it, I'd better have it. After a month, I tossed it. The whole thing baffled me. If he was short on money, why'd he insist on making a special trip to buy something not really needed? Had he ever returned to pay the tab? Did he leave me stranded because I was obviously turned off by his threat? Did he get embarrassed and just leave? He certainly didn't seem like the type, but clearly I made a misjudgment about him somewhere. Was he just impossibly and coked out dude? Like, what the hell was that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because it's baffled me for years. Bob went radio silent for a month, then texted, "Hey," 3 times in 1 week. I didn't respond. The next week he showed up at my work, requesting my section again. I was shocked to see him, and he'd spotted me already, so I decided to speak to him at least, but give the table away to another server. He acted as if nothing ever happened. Asked me why I didn't respond to his texts. I told him I was busy. He said he'd like to hang out again. I said I didn't think so. He asked why not. Me, you left me at bar number 2. B, that's not exactly what happened. Me, well, regardless, you were my ride. You knew that. You didn't try texting or calling me, and you've got my number. You were gone when I came out of the bathroom, but luckily I found some friends, so it didn't matter. I walked away at that point and let someone else get him his cobbler. He didn't try to contradict my statement that he'd left me stranded at the bar, at the very least, nor did he mention the cocaine he'd left in my bathroom. Bob continued to text me occasionally for the next 3 years. Every 3 to 6 months or so, a one-word TXT came through. "Hey, testing the waters." I never answered. I keep his number saved in my phone so I don't accidentally answer a text to this very day, just in case, should he ever try again. I was never really up for going out. I'm more of a stay-at-home with a pizza and scary movie type guy. However, I've been feeling so lonely lately. Specifically in the relationship category. See, I've never had very good luck with the dating scene. Most people nowadays want to use dating apps anyway. I don't know much more than a hand-me-down laptop and an old flip phone in the electronics department, so I guess you can call me an old-school type of person. My mom is always asking me when I'm going to get married and start a family, as I am 32 years old, and she seems to feel that I will never find happiness unless I'm shacked up behind a white picket fence with 2 shaggy dogs and a baby on my wife's hip. I decided it was time to venture out, since my coworker Sam called and practically begged me to come to the bar with him and a couple of his close friends tonight. I got a shower, brushed my teeth, and put on some year-old cologne that hasn't left the medicine cabinet since I got it for Christmas. I was trying not to overthink my clothes, since I wasn't really out looking to impress anyone. I chose a blue button-down shirt and gray jeans. Cuffed? I said to myself as I rolled up one of my pant legs. Nah, that looks weird. I grabbed my keys, headed out the door, locking it behind and stepping out to the driveway where my 2018 Chevy Aveo Saturday. "Hey there, old girl," I whispered to the car while tapping her on her cold, gray hood. When I pulled into the gravel driveway of the bar, I noticed it had begun to rain a bit, so I reached into the back of my vehicle to grab an umbrella. I quickly realized I must have left it at work last week when it rained early in the morning, but ended up being a beautiful day by the time my dragging shift was over. Just my luck, I muffled as I squinted my eyes looking at the tiny droplets rolling down my windshield. I took a deep breath, quickly stepped out of my car, and did a small jog up to the door of Motley's, the smallest bar in Richland. Stepping inside, I shook off the bit of water on myself and peered around the room, hoping that I would see Sam and his friends. That's strange. They weren't there. In fact, aside from the scraggly old man behind the bar serving drinks to a man who had clearly been through some sort of rough patch and decided to come costume the pain away, there was only one other person. A woman. She was beautiful, long blonde hair, fair complexion, and by the looks of it, seemed to be a fairly decent pool player. Standing in the corner of the room under low lights, she chalked up her pool stick and set herself up for a new game. I was almost mesmerized by her body language. I must admit, it's been a while since I've seen a woman that was really my type and not met her under business circumstances. Ring ting ring, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I fumbled my phone out of my semi-wet pocket from the rain and looked at the small screen. Sam, I answered with a bit of annoyance in my voice. After all, like I said, I am not the guy that liked to go out, and here I am by myself. Yeah, I said. Hey, I'm sorry I didn't call earlier. I got held up at the office and and you're not going to make it, right? I'll catch up with you next time, buddy. Sorry. I hung up without saying a word. Sighing, I flipped my phone closed and shoved it back in my pocket. Trouble with your friends, eh? I hear a soft voice behind me. I giggled while petting the back of my head and turning around. Yeah, they aren't coming, I guess. Well, why don't you grab a drink and come play around with me? She said as she grabbed another stick and chalked it up. Oh no, I'm good, I said. I could feel my mind start to race and my face start to flush. Oh come on, I insist. I'm Clara. She smiled at me. She had a beautiful smile. Her teeth were perfect, and her face was oddly symmetrical. Oddly. She walked around the table slowly. The balls were already set up like a perfect triangle, pointing directly at her. You shoot first, she said enthusiastically with that big smile of hers. All right, but I'll have to warn you. I'm really no good at this game, don't you worry. It's all for fun, right? She said. Right, I said as I cocked my head to the side and shrugged my shoulders. After a game that turned up much better than I imagined, and much talking about our work, random questions getting to know one another, and a brief chat of why I was extremely annoyed at Sam for once again inviting me out and ditching me, she questioned whether I wanted to play another round. I said eagerly sure. I must admit I was enjoying the company and conversation. Most women, or should I say girls, nowadays only want to either get right into physical stuff, or simply can't hold a conversation that isn't about reality TV drama or social media likes. How about we make it a bit more interesting this time? She had this look on her face that I couldn't quite decipher. Tell me what you have in mind, and then I will say yes or no. The room was quiet. The old CD jukebox had just stopped playing. We've only just begun, by the Carpenters in a dull and warped tone that was slightly unsettling. As she placed both hands on the edge of the pool table, I walked toward her with a curious look on my face, waiting for her wager. The room seemed to get just a bit darker, and I could hear the now heavy rain spackle on the tin-like roof of the bar. If I win, I want you, she said in a low tone. Her head hung just enough that her long, clearly fresh-washed blonde hair was dropping to the sides of her cheeks, but her smile, it grew a small bit larger than before. She glanced up at me, as if waiting for an answer. I stammered. No woman had ever said that to me before. I honestly wasn't sure what to say. Well, she grew impatient while tapping her well-manicured fingernails on the wood panel table side. What do you say? I assumed this meant we would be going back to my place. I hoped she wouldn't mind the smell of microwaved Chinese food and noisy neighbors. That's pretty much all my townhouse consisted of besides a few pieces of old furniture and my king-size bed. And if I win, I said confidently. I felt as though I was ready for whatever was about to happen. She was a mature, beautiful woman who had held up good conversation and had an open mind. We'll just see about that. She winked at me while still grinning. It's almost as if she never stopped smiling at me. We begin the game. At first, it was a normal playful banter between us, but as the night went on, I noticed her demeanor change in an eerie way. Every time I made a shot, she grew almost angry, and every time she made a shot, she seemed relieved and even more excited than one should be over a game. Thinking it would lighten the mood, since I had made 3 shots in a row, I started to ask, "Can I buy you a Dear I Dash?" And oh, no thank you, she interrupted at first, and then smiled again at me as she finished her denial. We were getting down to the wire, and my palms grew clammy. She was winning at this point, and all I could think of was that I was probably just going to be a letdown to this gorgeous woman if she wins. Just a few moments later, she hit the 8-ball in. Well, she said with a low chuckle. "Looks like I won, and it's time for you to hold up your end of the bet." Her smile looked dry. She looked tired, restless. She grabbed her jacket, tossed it over her shoulder casually. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked her. Still smiling and looking satisfied with her win, she said promptly, "Absolutely, I need to." With a small nod to each other, I grabbed my keys out of my pocket and began escorting her towards the door and outside. It was still raining, but it wasn't cold. It was muggy enough that the air was almost palpable. I opened the passenger door for her. Realizing that almost all my cup holders were full of empty takeout drinks, I embarrassingly said under my breath, "Sorry about my car. I'm a skinny man that can really put away my food, and I work a lot, so I eat out more than I eat at home." She didn't answer. She seemed eager, like she didn't care about anything I was saying. I ran around the front of the car and got in. I immediately noticed something was off. She was looking at me, with eyes as big as I've ever seen. Smiling as usual, but this time was different. Her mouth was wide, and there was a gap between her top and bottom teeth. I swear, the corners of her mouth were almost reaching her ears. "Are you ready?" she asked me quietly, almost whispering. The rain was still falling, but for some reason all I could hear was Clara. Yeah, I'm ready," I said with much trepidation. I thought to myself, is this a mistake? I don't even know this woman, and she's starting to creep me out. I began pressing my key into the ignition, and she told me to stop. I set my keys back on my lap, looking over toward her. Looking around her wide eyes and bigger than ever smile, I noticed the windows around her were all foggy, as if she was burning up with a fever and the car was freezing. She was radiating an unnatural heat. My eyes came back into focus. That's when I realized she was drooling. Her hair looked a bit less kept now, more stringy and scraggly. She was breathing heavily. "Do you need water?" I asked in a concerned tone. Only her mouth moved. In a guttural tone she whined. "I need you, Jacob. I never told you my name," I shuddered. At this point I felt nothing but sheer panic. Her eyes started looking me up and down slowly, and her drool began to turn a reddish brown. Like old blood. She was still giving off an incredible heat that was starting to move into the rest of the car. I felt trapped. I couldn't move, I was so terrified. I looked down at her once manicured nails in the bar to notice claw-like fingers that had no actual nails on them. They were just sharp skin needles. They were tapping on her legs. "I must have you," she mouthed. Her arms were locked, stretched out and stiff, and her head had become hunched over. It's almost like her neck was reaching for my flesh. I heard a rapid bang 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 on my car window, and I screamed louder than I have ever before and flung my car door open. "What are you kids doing in here?" It was the old man bartender. He must have been making sure he wasn't having any funny business in his parking lot, since the whole car was fogged up from Clara's body heat. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were alone. Have a good night." I rapidly swung my head around, confused at why he wasn't running away at the sight of this monster sitting next to me. She was gone. It was just me and my no longer transparent windows. That is the only evidence of her there was other than a small drop of her spit on my gear shifter. Believe me, I checked. I wasn't leaving until I knew that this woman, this thing, wasn't with me anymore. I took an old rag out of the back seat and wiped off the windows, turned on my car and drove back home. I still think she's coming for me, for my end of the deal. I see her smile in the moon. I see her silhouetted in shadows and highlights as the lamp in my room casts onto my empty walls in the late nights. I will never go to that bar again. I never want to leave my house again. But believe me, I don't think these walls are stopping Clara from finding me again. A few years ago, my boyfriend and best friend of 4 years had just dumped me. I was using this website, Meet Me, to meet people in my area while I was in college. My profile clearly stated that I was not explicitly looking for anyone to date, just wanted to meet new people. I had just been dumped, so I was really trying to put myself out there, and I'm not really the type to go out. In my area, there is a giant dance-a-thon that my university did every year to raise money for a children's hospital. I had someone message me and ask if I had heard of it. I told him my dance team usually performed at it every year. He told me he was actually one of the children that was supported by the event when he was younger. I thought that was really cool, so I asked him a little about his experience with that and genuinely thought it was interesting. After a while, that conversation was kind of dead, and I didn't really have much else to say, plus it was getting late, and I kind of wanted to go to bed. I told him so, and after about 10 minutes of laying in my bed trying to sleep, I got another notification. I glanced at it real fast, and this dude had honestly sent me a novel. After this event, I swiftly deleted the account, so unfortunately I don't have access to the exact messages, so I'm going to do my best to remember. The first one went a little something like, "Look, I will be honest, I really want to keep talking to you. In fact, I'd actually really like to take you on a date sometime. You seem like a really nice girl, and very sweet and interesting. I think we would get along extremely well. I am kind of alone in this word." Insert long-winded commentary about his loneliness here. He also did not use any punctuation, so it took me a long time to dissect this. I responded and told him I wasn't interested. He was about 7 years older than me, I was 20 at the time, and tried to say goodnight again. Then he responded with another novel, along the lines of, "I don't think you understand. You are perfect for me. You were made for me. I'm sure of it. God speaks to me, you know. God wants us to be together, and we will be. One day you will be mine." I'm trying to be polite because he was so nice earlier, and I guess I'm naive. I don't totally know, but I kept responding, trying to let him down easy. Here are some more highlights. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But God has decided this. Who are we to deny him of his plan? Someday in the future, we will end up together. You will realize it soon. We're going to have 3 children. I know their names. 2 boys, 1 girl. God spoke their names to me. I wrote them down when I was 7 years old, and I still have the paper. Do you know how I know you're going to be my wife? Because I wrote your name down with it. You will be my wife. Don't make a mistake. God is talking to me now. He's saying your name to me. I can't let you leave. At that point, I blocked and reported him, noped the hell off the site, and went to bed all creeped out. Morning came and he had found me on Facebook, and he was going on and on and on, starting with comments along the lines of, "Where did you go? How could you do this to me? You're denying your fate." He did it all night. I freaked out, told him to leave me alone pretty aggressively, and blocked him. I deleted all of the social media apps off my phone for the next few days. I asked my roommates to stay at home with me. They agreed after I told them what happened. I was actually genuinely afraid this dude was going to come find me. I mean, he was local and I had made nice conversation by telling him my major and some clubs I was in. He could have showed up anywhere, but thankfully he didn't, and that was the end of that. I'm a young 20s, gay man with a high sex drive. As such, I frequent Grindr, Scruff, etc. looking for opportunities to, get fucked in the ass. I have a thing for older men too. I don't really care how old as long as they don't look like my grandpa. I live in a big city, but even so Grindr and Scruff can be pretty dry some days. A lot of the guys I'm into aren't attracted to me cause I'm a lot younger. I'm also not white or muscly, so I don't get an abundance of attention on those apps in general. On those dry days, the wise thing to do would be to nut quietly by myself and go to sleep peacefully. But like any other 20-something man, sometimes my second head takes over and decides that sex tonight is a life necessity. I don't always meet someone in public first, but I'm pretty good at hooking up safe. I have a checklist of things that I will send one of my best friends every time I'm meeting someone. Screenshot of the online profile, all face pictures they gave me, a first name, their phone number if I have it, social media profiles if I have them, where we're meeting. I'll text them regular updates when I'm on the way over, when I've made it over, and whether or not the guy is the guy in the pictures. If we ever move locations, I text them an exact address/app/room number immediately, or turn my location sharing on. Once it looks like the dirty is about to start, I'll let them know a time by which I'll text that I'm safe. And my friends are pretty awesome, so they look out for me. One thing to note, if a guy offers me a drink while I'm with them, I make sure it's in a sealed can or bottle, or they let me watch while they pour. Most people are actually very conscious and deliberate about this nowadays. It's nice. A couple months ago, I figured I'd start proactively casting a wider net for those nights that the apps are dry. I joined this site online specifically catered to the gay older/younger crowd, very early internet days/retro in terms of UI. Eventually I get a message from this guy. He sends me a kind of low residential picture of him in oversized glasses and a sweater/button-down combo. I read his profile and he's 71, enough for me to think that's old. And I can't quite tell if I'm attracted to him from the first photo. I message back asking for a second, and good sign. He sends one over without fuss. Again, a bit low residential but without the glasses. And I think, yeah, okay, maybe. His profile says something about how he's from the UK, and he's quite tall, so I figure British accent tall daddy. It'll be novel at least. Reading further on, he prattles on about how he likes meeting people who are strong-willed and breaking them down to be completely submissive to him. Sounds hot. We exchange phone numbers and text on WhatsApp a bit. He seems a bit arrogant. He starts telling me people often say he looks like a movie star. He looks way better in real life. Apparently he chooses poor pictures intentionally, so people get pleasantly surprised when they meet. And is telling me how he can tell that I'm smart by the way I text or something. Heard it all before, but I have a bit of a high tolerance for this brand of old man bullshit posturing at this point. He lets me know a date he'll be coming in and staying in a hotel downtown a month later. I figure I'll probably forget about him by then and never message him again. And then a month later rolls by, and it's another particularly dry night on the apps. I'm having a need sex now night, and I remember that guy I was talking to from that site. I hit him up on WhatsApp. Sure enough, he's in town and tells me where he's staying. I tell him I'll be there in an hour. You disease-free? He takes a while to respond. Eventually he says he is squeaky clean. We'll talk about it when you get here. I'm like, okay, sounds good. Text one of my friends the usual. I'm a little more nervous for this one, just cause he seems a little odd, and I kind of trust the apps a bit more weirdly. It's much easier to tell if someone is a legit person when they live in the same area as you. I figure it's a hotel. You can't be planning anything too awful for me. I show up to the hotel, where he's standing in the lobby, and lo and behold, he looks exactly like his pictures, just much less happy and a bit more droopy. His shoulders hunch almost halfway up his neck. His torso is bent back at the waist a bit too much. He almost looks like he's imitating a confident cartoon character. But he is quite tall. He has a foot on me. I say hi. 2 words to describe the way he came across, preoccupied and calculating. His eyes seemed to shift everywhere constantly, and when they landed on mine they were freakishly piercing. I don't remember if he said hi back, but the first thing he starts talking about is how that family over to the right is hiding some great unhappiness and will never be happy with themselves. I ask, why do you say that? He says it's because they are giving so much attention to the kid and aren't talking to each other. I look over. Looks like a regular sister, little brother, and mom tired from the day of vacationing, waiting for their dad to finish up sorting something out at reception. By the way, he has a very strong American accent. Bummer. We walk to the elevators. The second thing he says to me is that I breathe from my lungs when I sleep and don't let my breath drop into my belly. I have some classical training as a performer, so I have a decent understanding of basic functions like that. Decent enough to try to forward the conversation with the absent-minded reply, no, I breathe low. Eyes lock on mine. A brief pause. Only a subtle change in tone. You want to know how I know that? I look at the way your lower jaw rests now. It kind of has this unsightly protrusion from the bottom of the skull where it should be resting. That probably happens overnight, when you start breathing from your chest, which makes that fat tongue of yours press up against your bottom teeth and deforms it. No. I'm pretty sure I breathe low. When I sleep. Okay, no need to get defensive. I'm happy to be proven wrong. I've never experienced this level of agitation from anyone within the first 2 minutes of meeting them. I have been in emotionally manipulative relationships before, so the feeling was familiar. And weirdly intense for a first meeting. My brain kind of goes on autopilot polite hookup mode, and I figure maybe it'll be okay once we stop talking. He continues posturing as we ride up the elevator. He loves psychology and predicting how humans act apparently. We get off on his floor and approach his room. I quickly fire off the suite number plus, he's a little odd, in a text to my friend. As he taps his keycard, he glances at me over his shoulder. You don't need to text someone my room number, you know. Okay, well I just did. I'm a very trustworthy person. You have to trust me. Okay, I just do that with everyone I meet. The room is fairly normal, nothing too weird. His stuff is piled in a corner a bit haphazardly. Bed is made, lights are all on, normal hotel room. I see an open wine bottle on the desk. A glass of Coke and a glass of white wine are pre-poured. I take off my jacket and sit on the edge of the bed. He sits on the desk chair, starts quizzing me. Do you do this a lot? You asked if I was disease-free. What are you expecting to happen here? Because I am a squeaky clean guy, I don't have sex with people unless I am in a relationship with them. The reason I ask is people who do this a lot tend to be quite dirty and slutty, and eventually it catches up to them. Listen, I can tell you're a smart guy. I can tell you're a strong-willed person. What I really like is when a strong-willed person like you becomes completely submissive to me. I like breaking them. At this point, I realize he's not going to stop talking, and feel like it might be a good idea to leave before having my pants down around him. But I feel frozen, on the verge of tears even. He is making me feel small, like a child. I see him smile a little. He likes it. I am sufficiently creeped out. Look, I don't really think we're a match here, so I'm gonna go. Okay, you're feeling unsafe. No, I'm not. I just don't think we're on the same page. Let me know what I can do to make you feel safe. How about you have a drink? No thanks. Diet Coke or wine? I look at the pre-poured drinks on the desk. I get a gut feeling that I should not drink them. I stand up. No, I'm really fine, thank you. I quickly get my jacket on and jump into a polite, nice to meet you, take care, bye. On my way out the door, he give me wrong directions to get down to the subway from the hotel. Tells me smart people take that route, stupid people take the long way. I say thanks and leave. I text my friend, holy fuck, I'm safe. And I take my normal-ass subway route home. Thank you very much. I pledge to stop letting my dick think for me. Young Harrison Ford, let's not meet again. March 2021 update for those concerned. I wanted to clarify that this has not been my normal experience at all on dating apps. I've met up with at least 100 partners by this point, and this was the worst experience by far. This isn't representative of what it's like if you use dating apps carefully and use your head. That being said, I've been dealing with mental health stuff and have grown a lot as a person since this experience. I feel like I am a lot more confident now, and I would never get this deep into this kind of situation again. Young gays/trans/NBS. Stay safe, y'all. Know your worth. Do not settle for bad dick. You are your own validation, not another person, no matter how horny you are. And yes, I really mean no matter how horny you are. I was about 13 when my family went on our annual trip to Poland to visit family. My mother and father both come from a small rural village about 2 to 3 hours away from Warsaw. It's an idyllic little place that is surrounded by lush forest and wheat fields. Life is different there. Everyone is very carefree and relaxed. Being the small place it is, everyone knows one another, since everyone essentially lives on the same street. I had made a bit of a reputation for myself there, being known as the American girl who visits in the summers, so whenever we would arrive the whole village would know. I loved the attention. All the kids wanted to play, and adults dotted on me. One of the townspeople I saw most frequently was Tomek. Tomek was a funny guy in his upper 20s who would work in the village deli store. He would always give me extra meat any time my grandparents would send me out to pick food up or offer to show me inside the kitchen. I never took him up on that offer. The idea of seeing how my meat was made was too much for my 13-year-old mind. Though I didn't know it at the time, Tomek had the reputation of being the town lunatic. He wasn't a stranger to the police force nor the villagers, as he was a bit of a petty thief. My grandparents told me when I got older that my grandfather had not once but twice caught him trying the doors of his shed, and then excusing himself when caught as drunk and unsure where he was. Despite this, I had never had a reason to fear or avoid him. The village had a tradition called Gra Odwajai, which translates to the game of courage, that would fall in between the dates of our visits. On this day the village children would be set into teams, and then given items to find that were hidden around the woods and our village parameters. The event lasted all day, and the group that had the most found items would win a prize. The courage part of the game would be trying to attain the golden item, which would be in the woods and guarded by a few adults armed with water sprayers/water guns. The only way to get the golden item was to avoid being sprayed with water. If all members of a team were hit, then the team would lose the chance to attain it. My team consisted of my 4 friends, Eva, Eric, Bartek, and Powell. Our strategy was to get as many of the items around town, and then try our luck at the golden object when it got darker in order to be harder to spot. We got a lot of the items throughout the day and worked up a good sweat after racing against the other children. Around 7 p.m. we had attained 12 items, and were ready to try our luck at the golden item. We had heard from the other children that the adults were being relentless, guarding the object with ferocity. The wooded area that was the destination, as the golden item area, was behind Eric's house. Therefore he took the lead in devising the plan. Our plan was that we were going to split up into 2 teams. Eric, Eva, and Bartek were meant to grab the adults' attention and drive them away as far as possible, while Powell and I would sneak in and grab the item. Feeling confident, we headed into the forest as the sun was slipping from the sky. We followed the dirt path for about 5 minutes and then stepped off it, following Eric as he navigated through the shrubbery with ease. He stopped us just as we reached a thick clump of bushes. Putting a finger to his lips, he motioned for us to look through the gaps in the shrubbery and see the adults. It was dark now, so it was hard to see who was actually guarding the items, but we could make out 4 shapes huddled together, chatting softly. Without hesitation, we moved into our plan of action. Our 3 friends navigated around and disappeared from our sight, only for us to hear their laughs and the voices of adults yelling to get them. Powell and I watched as the adults raced after our friends, all abandoning the area they had stood around. I remembers glancing around and getting ready to jump out of the bushes when I felt Powell's arm on my shoulder and saw him make a shushing sound. "They might not all be gone, wait a bit," he urged. We sat quietly, listening intently for any sounds. Then it happened, the slightest sound of something moving on the other side of the clearing. We couldn't make out who or what it was, so we stayed quiet, peering through the gaps of the shrubbery. Powell saw it first. He pointed out what looked like a dark figure crouching behind a tree closest to the clearing. We watched as the figure moved tree to tree, never stepping out from behind, just simply observing. Just as I was about to suggest that one of us should cause a distraction, we hear a yelp and turn to see another team approaching, clearly happy that there seemed to be no one around where the golden item should be. We watched as this small group of 2 raced around the clearing, but didn't pick anything up. I kept waiting for the adult to step out and spray the kids, but the figure remained crouched, half visible behind the trees. One of the girls approached the area the adult was, but she was busy looking up at the tree, musing to her partner that maybe the object was put on a branch. We watched as she began pulling herself up the lowest branch, and I remember the way my stomach dropped when all of a sudden we saw the adult shoot out behind the tree, grab her leg, and start pulling her into the darkness of the forest. Her partner ran off screaming, leaving me and Powell unsure what to do. We watched frozen with horror as the adult began covering the girl's mouth in some attempt to silence her. Before either one of us could do anything, all of a sudden Tomek came running up the path and threw himself onto the man. Powell shot out to help Tomek while I ran back to call for help. When I reached the backyard that was the destination spot for the end of the game, I was screaming uncontrollably in a mix of words that took me a few attempts to get out that help was needed. A large group of the men raced toward the forest while I hid in my mother's arms, awaiting to see everyone arrive back safely. My friends, Eric, Eva, and Bartek approached me cautiously and asked what had happened and why Powell and I hadn't come back. It had turned out that after Eva, Bartek, and Eric had distracted the adults and drove them away, the adults had decided to end the time to get the gold item. They had assumed that everyone had a chance to try to get it and didn't want the kids wandering the forest after dark. One of the adults had already pocketed the item when they chased our group back towards the main backyard. My team had assumed that we would see that there was nothing there and returned as well, which is why they didn't come looking for us. As I retold what happened, everyone in the backyard listened to me with wide eyes. About 10 minutes passed, and we saw the group of men coming back, Powell walking aside his father and the girl who had been attacked in the arms of her assumed father. As they all approached, I asked Powell what had happened. As the parents gathered and talked in hushed voices, Powell described to us how Tomek had beat the guy bloody, but let him escape when he turned away, surprised by the men that had arrived to help. He mentioned that a few men were still out scouting the forest land for the guy. I then asked the remainder of my friends why help was not sent earlier by the girl's partner that had run away screaming. Everyone had looked at me with blank faces, and the sudden realization hit me hard. The next events become a blur. It's a mix of me racing to my parents with my friends and asking about the girl, a frenzy of people calling out her name and begging her to come out, a whirlwind of everyone rushing to get their kids inside, and a mayhem adults swarming together to go search the woods again and call the police. It's been 8 years now, and she hasn't been found. Tomek was one of the main suspects, believed to be part of a 2-man kidnapping operation, but backed out when he saw that too much attention was brought to the event. I'm not sure whatever happened to him, but I can't help but feel guilty that I didn't do anything to help either of those girls. I saw the girl run away. Powell and I were the last to see her. Sometimes when I see a child with braided hair, I get thrown back to that night, and I can still see her braids swirling around her as her figure disappeared from sight. Her name was Dorita, and I hope she's alive. I come from a small town in Canada. We only have 2 bars in the whole place, and they are frequented often by the locals in the winter and summer. Same old people that know each other, some get along, so do not. In the summertime we get a lot of cottagers and people from the city. We like to call them cityots because some of them can be really douchey, rude, and simply have no regard for politeness. Well, one night we were at the local bar and having a good time. I went there with a girlfriend of mine and her 2 friends whom I have never met, but they were really nice but not my type. I see a Cadillac Escalade all black with chrome rims and a white Mercedes pull into the parking lot. I was kind of intrigued, so I made sure to take note on who walked in the door. I suddenly feel a touch on my shoulder, and it's a young Arabic/Pakistani/Indian man asking me to dance. I politely declined. I must say I am not racist, but he wasn't my type. I like metal look. I found him to be very weird as he was sitting at the bar staring at me. He takes out his cell phone, takes a picture of me. The flash was the dead giveaway, and seems to be sending it to someone. Within 5 minutes, those people who I saw pull in the parking lot earlier come inside. It is an older Arabic Pakistani Indian. Forgive me, I come from a small town in which the population is pretty much white, so I am not sure exactly the race. He looked about 60, he had 2 middle-aged men with him, and 1 younger male about my age, who I must say, was pretty cute. I continued dancing with my friends on the dance floor, but couldn't get past that creepy feeling I was being glared at. My friend tells me that those men are staring at me and pointing, and it's kind of freaky. I decide to get off the dance floor and go sit down with my friends and have some drinks. The older man came over to my table and tapped me on the should and asked me to come over so he can talk to me. I walked over and he said, "I want to introduce you to my son." He waved his son over and we shook hands and said hello. I asked him if there was any reason why he wanted me to meet his son, and he said I am a very beautiful girl with nice hair and clothes, and that he wants me to date his son. I kindly said no thank you, I am currently seeing someone at the moment. He kind of looked at me with a weird look of disappointment mixed with rage. He then put his arm around me and pulled out a wad of cash and said, "Come on, let us buy you a drink and talk to us more. You may want to leave that other man." I looked over at my friends and they were waving me over and were like, "WTF?" I said, "1 minute and talk to this man a little more." Stupid me, I know, but I was curious at this time. I asked where they were from, and they said Mississauga, and they were wondering if I want to go up to Ottawa and party for the weekend at their mansion. I declined, and he kept pressuring me on to his son. I finally got his arm from around me and walked over to my friends. They took a couple more pictures of me before leaving the bar. I thought that was really weird, like am I being targeted for a kidnapping, or am I being shopped around to being someone's wife or something, maybe a sex slave? I had no idea, but it was too weird for me. Last call hits, and we decide to grab our jackets at the coat check because it could be a very big line. We grab out jackets and wait outside for our taxis to come. Stupid people were jumping and pushing for cabs in front of the bar, so we decided to walk down to the other street and call one from there. We waited a few minutes, and who comes rolling around the corner? Those men in the bar. They have a 3rd car with them. My friend and I, the person I was seeing, and the 2 men that came with us were all freaked out, and they stood there blocking me from their view. They called me over to their car. I did not go. They got out and were walking towards us, and my friend snapped pictures of them and said she also wrote down their license plates. They called her a whole bunch of hurtful names, got in their cars, and drove off. I didn't go back to the bar for a while, but apparently there was a rumor going around to be careful because there are men trying to lure girls into the city with them. I don't know what they wanted from me. I don't know what they are doing with the pictures. I SDLL don't know what to think of it. Backstory. I used to do a lot of online dating because the city where I live is very hard to meet people in. Everyone kind of keeps to themselves. I met this particular champ on OkCupid. I guess you could say I go for a certain kind of guy. Tall, handsome, well-dressed, driven, intellectual, with a touch of hipster and geek thrown in there. I guess you could say I have high standards. Therefore, I spent a lot of time screening potential dates with extended messages, chatting or texting before we met in person. I like to believe that because I basically raised myself on the internet, I have a good 6th sense for creeps and weirdos. I call it my FIF, funny inner feeling. George was everything I seemed to be looking for. He rocked a pompadour and a 6 o'clock shadow with the ease of Ryan Gosling. His profile was rife with eloquent language, and his messages to me were flowery and deep. We touched upon philosophy, literature, and fantastic music, and I was quickly smitten. We started texting, and our texts were similarly full of excellent vocabulary and unique conversation topics. One chilly fall night, I went out with some of my friends to an independent hip-hop night, and I drank more whiskey sours than I care to admit. While sober Walnut Whale may not have been so reckless, tipsy Walnut Whale felt like texting George at 1 a.m. asking him if he wanted to meet up for pizza felt like a good idea. After all, spontaneity generally leads to good things and excellent adventures, right? I walked into the pizza place and saw George sitting amidst all the empty tables awaiting me. He was even more beautiful than in his photographs, and my heart skipped a beat. Our conversation rambled and weaved itself for hours. We had an excellent rapport, and I felt entirely at ease with this man. That's when at around 5 a.m., he offered to take me to his house to watch a movie he had made. I was not alarmed. However, I very firmly told him I would be happy to accompany him home, but I was not the sort of woman who fucks on the first date. With a smile that dented his dimples, he told me he respected that and linked his hand with mine. We practically skipped to his home, still babbling wildly at one another. I was so full of excitement, I felt that we had a real, tangible connection. When we reached his abode, I became even more impressed. He lived in the basement of a massive old mansion. He had 5 roommates, all women and all professional artists. As we tiptoed downstairs to his lair, I was assaulted on all sides by good taste, and that only continued as we hit his cave. Full to the brim of awesome art and interesting artifacts, I found myself even more fascinated with him. We both curled up on his bed, comfortably enjoying one another's company as he queued up the student film he had made a few years prior. It was some sort of 3D mess of colors and lines set to Brian Eno, but truth be told we weren't paying much attention to it. George stared at me, and then he went in for the first kiss. And when he pulled away, he had changed. His mellow, happy attitude had intensified, but not in a sexy way. His eyes had turned stony, his features had sharpened, and his grip on me tightened. "I'm James Bond, you know." I giggled nervously. Suddenly all my alarm bells were going off at once. "I'm sorry, I've never seen the movies." His eyes narrowed as he regarded me. "What I'm saying is, don't get too close. Don't get close at all." "What?" We had been having such a great time. I was incredibly confused with this sudden Jekyll and Hyde personality switch. "Let's, watch your movie." Attempting to back out of the situation gracefully, and thinking perhaps he just showed nervousness strangely, I inched slightly away from him and leaned back, trying to appear nonchalant as I fixed my eyes to the TV screen. In reality, I was on alert, every nerve in my body ready for flight. I'm a big girl, not fat, just tall and Amazonian. George was about the same height and build as me, and I knew I could probably take him if something happened, but I wanted to tactfully extract myself from the situation before that happened. Backing off seemed like the wrong thing to do. I felt George tense beside me before he jumped on top of me, trying to force his hand up my shirt. "George," I protested past his reaching tongue. "I told you, I'm not going to fuck on the first date." My heart was beating a drumline in my chest. I didn't want to become violent in case something even worse happened, but I was pushing him off of me as intensely as I dared. "Then why the fuck did you come over to my house in the middle of the night?" "I told you I'm James Bond." As he bellowed in my face, I shoved him off of me and stood up all in one quick motion. As I snatched up my purse and charging phone as quickly as possible, his demeanor softened again. "Look, Walnut Whale, I'm sorry. I can't. My ex-girlfriend, she really fucked me over, you know? I'm broken. I can't love." He opened his arms, trying to get me to come to him again. Something deep within me twinged, some inkling of compassion for this suddenly broken man in front of me, but I knew it was a ploy. I buttoned up my jacket and shoved on my hat. "I need to go home." Again, his expression changed. He set his jaw and a flash of hatred passed his visage. "Fine. Fucking fine. I'll walk you out." "No, that's okay, I protested. "And oh, I said I am going to walk you out." Meekly I nodded. I made a beeline to the basement door, fumbling with the lock until I was free into glorious, frigid early morning sunshine. My breath fogging in front of me, George followed me like a kicked puppy. At the gate, I paused to say goodbye to him, full of confusion and regret. He stared at me, the man I had met earlier that night, all gentleness and handsome aloofness. Then he grabbed both of my arms in a vice grip and attempted to kiss me. I turned my face sideways and he collided with my cheek, and his fingers tightened around my arms so hard that I had bruises the next day. George, you're hurting me. George, I need to catch my bus. Wordlessly, he released me and stonily watched me walk away until I rounded the corner. I haven't heard from him since then, but I have seen him at the bars, and he is always laughing and looking perfectly normal and approachable. Look, I'm not saying I believe in ghosts. I don't even believe in astrology, and that's like 90% of my Tinder matches' personalities. But after what happened last weekend, I might have to reconsider, at least the ghost part. So last Friday, my friends and I decided to get out of the city for a little mental health weekend. You know, wine, cheese boards, pretending we're rich and sophisticated, standard millennial things. We rented this cute little Airbnb in the middle of nowhere, a big old Victorian house with creaky floors and clawfoot bathtubs. The photos made it look cozy, and the reviews were mostly positive, except for one guy who complained about weird noises. But every Airbnb has that one review, right? I figured it was just Karen energy. I should have paid attention. The place was fine during the day. Quaint, even. We spent the afternoon drinking too much rose and taking Instagram photos of the house's weird antique furniture. There was a rocking chair in the corner of the living room that looked like it had seen some shit. But hey, it added to the vibe. Things didn't get weird until later that night. It started around 11 p.m., when we were all in the living room playing some dumb card game. I think it was Cards Against Humanity, which feels a little ironic now, given what happened. Anyway, we were mid-round when we heard it, a loud thud from upstairs. We all froze. What was that? Sarah asked, clutching her wine glass like it was a weapon. Probably just the house settling, I said, because that's what people always say in horror movies right before they get murdered. I wasn't exactly convincing, though, because I was already mentally mapping out which friend I could trip if we needed to make a run for it. Sorry, Sarah. Or maybe it's a ghost, Taylor said, grinning like an idiot. Taylor is that friend who's always trying to summon spirits with a Ouija board at parties. She lives for this stuff. Shut up, Taylor, I said. You're not helping. We tried to laugh it off and keep playing, but then we heard it again, another thud, louder this time. And then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming from the upstairs hallway. Now at this point, any sane person would have left. But apparently we're not sane. Instead, we decided to investigate. Because that's what you do when you're drunk and stupid, and have watched exactly 0 documentaries about people who get murdered in the woods. We crept upstairs, armed with the most intimidating weapons we could find. A fireplace poker, a wine bottle, and for some reason, a throw pillow. That was Sarah's idea. I don't know what she thought she was going to do with it. Smother the ghost. The hallway was dark, but the footsteps had stopped. We checked all the bedrooms, one by one, but they were empty. No sign of an intruder, no sign of anything weird. By the time we got to the last room, we were starting to feel a little silly. See? Nothing, I said, pushing open the door. And that's when the rocking chair started moving. It was just sitting there in the corner, rocking back and forth like someone was sitting in it. Except no one was. We all just stood there, staring at it, until Taylor finally broke the silence. Okay, not to be dramatic, she said, but I think the ghost likes my vibe. Taylor, shut up. I hissed, yanking her back into the hallway. At this point, we were all freaking out. Sarah was halfway to tears, and even Taylor looked a little less smug. I decided we needed to get out of the house and regroup, so we bolted downstairs and out onto the front porch. That's when Sarah realized she'd left her phone inside. Leave it, I said. You can buy a new one. It's an iPhone 14, she wailed, like that was a good enough reason to risk her life. Before I could stop her, she ran back inside. The rest of us stood there on the porch, arguing about whether we should go after her or just call 911. For the record, I voted for the latter. Sorry, Sarah. But then a minute later, she came back out, holding her phone and looking totally fine. I got it, she said, panting. But there's something you should probably see. We followed her back inside, because apparently none of us value our lives, and she led us to the kitchen. And there, on the counter, was a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread that hadn't been there before. Next to it was an open jar of peanut butter and a butter knife. And sitting on a plate was a perfectly made peanut butter sandwich. What the hell? Taylor whispered. Okay, so maybe it's a nice ghost, Sarah said. Like maybe it just wanted a snack. I stared at her. Sarah, ghosts don't make sandwiches. Well, maybe they do, she shot back. You don't know their lives. At this point, I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or burn the house down. But before we could debate the sandwich situation any further, the lights flickered, and we heard that thudding noise again. this time from the kitchen ceiling, directly above us. We all screamed. I'm not proud of it, but it happened. Okay, yeah, no, I said, grabbing my keys. We're leaving. We ran out of the house, piled into my car, and drove to the nearest motel, where we spent the night drinking minibar vodka and trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. None of us slept. The next morning, I called the Airbnb host to tell them what had happened. They were surprisingly chill about it. Oh yeah, that's just Walter, the host said. He's harmless. Walter, I repeated, thinking maybe I'd misheard. The ghost, they explained. The house is haunted, but it's nothing to worry about. Walter just likes to mess with people sometimes. Did he make you a sandwich? He does that when he likes you. On CL they have that strictly platonic section, and I was looking to make some friends. This girl replied to a post I made, and it turned out we lived in the same neighborhood and had stuff in common. I don't know why, but I invited her over to hang out and smoke. She comes over and looks pretty cool, lots of tattoos, clothes from Urban Outfitters, until I notice when she sits on my couch that she's got fresh, semi-bleeding cuts on her thighs. I ignore it, and we start talking. Her phone is constantly getting texts, and she's answering them every time. This is important. So we talk, and story one, she tells me she's in a long-distance relationship. Her BF has schizoaffective disorder, a mix of schizophrenia and bipolar, and has gone off his meds. He has been threatening her all day. Oh, and BTW, she also suffers from schizoaffective disorder, but don't worry, she takes her meds. Story 2, we start talking about my studies. I'm in women's studies. And when reproductive stuff comes up, she stops me and says this stuff is a trigger as she was raped last year and isn't dealing with it very well. This is why I cut, she says as she points to the fresh cuts on her thighs. Story 3, she was homeless, living in LA, and got into a van when the guy locked her and a friend in and tried to rape them. I pulled a knife on that motherfucker and would have killed him, but he let us out eventually. She then orders food and offers to smoke me up. As an added bonus, she wants to sprinkle Klonopin on top. I decline and we smoke my nice, clean kush. I get up to go to the bathroom and she says, giggling, wouldn't it be funny if when you came out all your stuff was gone? BC, I stole it. I held it. Then her phone rings. She starts yelling at the person on the phone. She hangs up and apologizes, explaining her mom is coming to get her. BC. She just got released from the mental ward 2 days ago and is on suicide watch. She has curfew. She thanks me and leaves. This all happened within an hour and a half. Best story I have. Lady was crazy. I have this close friend, Jack, who relayed to me a pretty terrifying tale of something that happened to his friend a long time ago. My mentor, Jack, is now a retired former HR community college guy in his mid-60s. 30 years ago, however, Jack was working as a bartender in a bar in Portland's gay community. That's how Jack met Randy. Randy was a good-looking, well-spoken customer in his mid-20s. Pretty attractive 80s preppy type. Randy lived close to Jack, and the two went on a couple of dates for a few weeks. Randy was relatively new to Portland, having moved there a few years ago after his parents in small-town Connecticut flipped out about him being gay and tried to commit him to an institution. They were dating casually, but Jack was shocked when he discovered that this clean-shaven college graduate was working the streets of Portland as a hustler. You see, while we think of Portland as being a hipster haven now, back in the 1980s, there were a lot of seedy elements to the town, and that included the gay underground prostitution scene. The revelation about Randy's career happened this way. Randy called Jack one night and asked him if he could come over. He showed up at Jack's apartment, pretty upset. Randy confessed to Jack that he was a prostitute, and then relayed a wild tale about something that had happened to him the night before with a client. He refused to name who it was, but told Jack that it was a very prominent local businessman, someone that was very high profile in mid-1980s Portland. The client was into S&M/bondage stuff, and Randy had seen him about once a month for a year. The previous night, after they concluded their scene, the client said to Randy, "I had a fantasy that I kidnapped you and kept you forever." He asked Randy if he wanted to stay with him. Of course, Randy said, "No way," and the guy got angry. The chauffeur drove Randy home, which was in hindsight a huge mistake. The client now knew where he lived. Earlier that evening, Randy was headed home, but before he got to his apartment, Randy noticed his client's limo parked down the street from his building. Randy noped the fuck of there and ate dinner elsewhere. But when he went home, the limo was still there with the chauffeur sitting in the car. That's when he decided to go over to Jack's place and confess everything. Randy was completely terrified now. He tried to laugh it off as some dumb joke. But the fact that the chauffeur had spent hours parked in the same spot a few blocks from his apartment building was scary as hell. Randy begged if he could stay in Jack's place for a few days, so this could die down. Even though Jack was totally surprised and pretty confused about all this, he let him stay at his place until a few days later Randy called him at work and told Jack he'd decided to go back to his apartment. Randy said he'd call Jack later in the week about a movie they were planning to see that weekend. Jack never heard from him again. When Jack went to his apartment building a few days later to check on Randy, the building manager said that Randy had moved out. After that, there wasn't much Jack could do. Randy didn't tell him who the guy was, and he didn't know much about Randy's background, except for some vague idea of where he came from. And this was, again, the 1980s. Policemen were not going to make a big deal about some male prostitute that went missing. Jack kept hoping that he'd get a call from Randy at some exotic locale. But as days turned into weeks, turned into years, turned into a quarter century, he stopped expecting that call. Hopefully, Randy just skipped town. Maybe he ran all the back to Connecticut, found some sympathetic family member who helped get him on his feet, and he's put all of this behind him, and he's just some regular 50-something guy now with a regular career and regular concerns. When I was about 11, I had a steady babysitter named Jane. My brother and sister were 17 and 18, so they were either too cool to babysit me or busy with school around this time. Jane was their age, but I don't think her family had a lot of money, so she would babysit me almost every weekend instead of doing normal teenager stuff. My family lived in a pretty well-to-do cul-de-sac in the back of a large neighborhood. It was one of those neighborhoods where the houses got nicer the further back you went. The houses at the front, by the main road, were not as nice but still not terrible or anything. This is where Jane lived. Since I was 11 and prepubescent, I was a huge pain in the ass. But not to Jane. I looked at her as a best friend. We did so many fun things together, and I could truly tell that Jane loved me. One Saturday night, my mom was making plans for the next week. But for the first time, Jane couldn't babysit. She had her first prom. She was very excited because the boy she had had a crush on for years asked her. I knew because she had been telling me about him since she started high school. My mother and I were both very excited for her, and I saw my mom hand her way more money than usual. Jane's eyes teared up, and she gave us both a hug and left. Since this was the mid-90s, everyone got babysitters from word of mouth. My mom heard from another mother that a girl that used to babysit for her kids had just moved back to her parents' house after grad school. She lived down the street from Jane. Her name was Becky, and my mom called her up to see if she could babysit me that Saturday. Becky excitedly said yes and proceeded to ask my mom somewhat strange, but not entirely alarming, questions like how tall I was, what I looked like, etc. There might have been other questions, but I was just hearing my mom's side of the conversation. When she hung up the phone, my mom said to my dad, "Wow, she sure is thorough." I was a little nervous, as Jane had been the only one to babysit me for years. In the rare instances she couldn't do it, my parents usually just canceled their plans. But this was a work party and my dad was being honored, so that wasn't an option. A couple days before Becky was to come, I begged my mom to call Jane. I wanted to see if I could come over the night of prom and see her in her dress. My mom kept telling me she wouldn't want me there, and that I could see pictures, but I insisted. So my mom called Jane and handed the phone to me. "Hey there, May, how are you?" "I'm good. I wanted to see if I could come over on Saturday and see you in your prom dress." "Of course. I am getting my hair done, but you can come after that, maybe around 5:30. Tell your mom to call first, and make sure that I am home." "It won't be my mom, it'll be Becky." Dead silence. "Wait, what?" "Since you couldn't watch me, my mom found a girl named Becky to do it." Long pause. "Okay, sweetie. That's fine." She hurriedly got me off the phone. I went to school the next day, and came home to my mom hanging up the phone, shaking her head. Poor Jane. Her date doesn't want to take her anymore. They had a fight. She wanted to know if she could still watch you this Saturday. I feel bad canceling on Becky, but it's completely up to you. Of course, I chose Jane. And as usual, we had tons of fun. I didn't bring up the prom because I didn't want to make her sad. But then she asked me if I wanted to play dress up. We did each other's hair and put on my mom's dresses and took pictures with my mother's Polaroid. It was the best night of an 11-year-old's life. Jane went to community college, and by the time she went to a 4-year school, I no longer needed a babysitter. We kept in touch a little after that, but before long we both got busy and we lost touch. This was where the story ended, until this past weekend. I ran into Jane at a bar. She was not sober. In fact, she was very drunk. She didn't seem to be doing well. She was very thin, and it looked like she had track marks on her arms. This made me extremely sad because she was one of the people I loved most in the world, at least at one time. I sat next to her at the bar and asked how she was doing. Her face lit up and she gave me a big hug. I always knew you would do well for yourself. Look at you. You're all grown up and beautiful. You look great too, Jane. No, I don't, but it's okay. We started talking, and she was drinking even more. I got the feeling that she was in blackout territory. She was with a group of people that seemed to be her friends, so I wasn't entirely worried for her, but I still didn't want to leave her for some reason. She seemed really happy to see me. We started reminiscing, and once it was my turn to bring up a story again, I said, "Remember when that dirtbag stood you up for prom, so we staged our own prom with pictures and everything? That was great." She looked at me through foggy eyes and smiled a small smile. He didn't stand me up. The replacement babysitter was a sick fuck. When I was little, she beat me, sexually abused me, threatened me, and locked me in closets. Then she would invite her boyfriend over to do the same things to me. She told me if I ever told anyone, she would kill my family, and I would have to live in an orphanage. She took pictures of me too. I had repressed it until you said her name that day. Now it's all back. All of it. I should have told someone, but it's too late now. I just didn't want people to know what had happened to me. I thought they would look at me differently. I regret so much. Who knows what else she did? She set down her drink and gave me a hug and a good to see you, like she hadn't just dropped a major bomb on me. She stumbled out with her boyfriend. Everything came flooding back to me. The phone conversation with Becky with all the details. Jane's silence when I said Becky's name. How Jane stayed with me every single weekend until I was old enough to not need a babysitter. Some people might say Jane should have told someone, but she was just a kid. But she was an extraordinary kid. She gave up her prom to save me. She gave up every single weekend after that, so that nothing would ever happen to me. She was my guardian angel. Unfortunately, Jane didn't have her own Jane, and it makes me feel horrible. This story kind of creeped me out. It happened about 9 years ago, and sometimes comes to my mind. It creeps me out. So, I was on an adult dating site. One of the fetish types. I know. Don't judge me. I just was looking for some fun. LOL. Anyway, I was stupid and gave out more information than I should have. I was chatting with a guy. He had asked me at some point what I did for work. At the time, I was working at a McDonald's, so I told him. He asked which one. I stupidly told him which one. We chatted off and on. We hadn't been chatting for too long. I also stupidly gave him my phone number at some point. He would talk about how he wanted to meet me on my break and have some fun on my break. I told him no thanks. I don't bring my lifestyle to my job. Anyway, so I checked my messages just before I was due to clock out of work. Luckily I did. He mentioned that he was at my job and told me what he ordered. I think it was the Big Mac meal. I was like, okay, well, don't expect me to do anything with you. I'm not interested. He then got upset and wasn't accepting that I wasn't interested. I was also scared because I had sent him a face picture of myself, but I had never received one from him. I really wasn't too interested in him, so I decided I didn't need a face picture since I likely wasn't going to meet up with him. His interests weren't what I was looking for, and I have a hard time straight up saying I'm not interested and just slowly started to ghost whoever I had no interest in. Now, luckily, I hadn't told him my work schedule, so he didn't know that I was about to clock out. So, after clocking out, I told one of my managers that I was on a dating site, and some guy just showed up to my work, and I have no idea what he looks like, and that I was going to hang out in the back in the break room for a bit. Luckily, she didn't judge me and just was like, oh, okay. So I waited about half an hour before I left. I didn't have a car at the time, and had to walk home, and was afraid he would see me and try to pick me up in his car. Luckily, no one followed me, so I was in the clear. So creepy guy, let's never meet. I don't think he ever messaged me, or I ended up blocking him or something. I don't know if this really is all that creepy, but it creeps me out that some random person just decided that he would show up to my job and expect me to want to meet up with him. So, yeah. Now, I just give a vague response as to where I work now. I don't work in the same town I live in, so it would be hard to pinpoint my exact location. This opened my eyes and made me more aware of the information I give out to strangers. 3 or 4 years ago, I decided to check out Tinder and what it was all about. Thinking, what the hell, and that I had nothing to lose, I quickly made a profile. After an hour or so of checking out the app and how to use it, I matched with a guy in my area, and we started talking. We spent most of that afternoon exchanging messages and chatting, asking questions, and getting to know one another. By late afternoon, he had given me his cell phone number, and we took the messages away from Tinder and started texting. For a few days after, everything was normal, and we were having nice chats almost daily. Naively, I thought this was pretty cool, to match with someone so nice, and that had similar interests on my first go using Tinder. Boy was I wrong. On the fourth day of us texting back and forth, his tone shifts, and he starts asking really odd questions. Some of them sexual, some of them not. There had been flirting between us, and a few double entendres, etc., but nothing like what he started asking. A lot of his questions were really sexually specific. I quickly nipped this in the bud and told him that I was uncomfortable. He apologized for this and accepted how I was feeling. We proceed from there, albeit a lot more cautiously on my part. I didn't have a lot of dating experience at the age of 20, and as this was my first time using Tinder and online dating, I thought this was normal behavior. However, I knew to not ignore the odd feeling I had in the pit of my stomach. When he asked if I'd like to meet up for coffee a couple of days later, I accepted somewhat reluctantly. I knew enough about this sort of stuff to make sure to tell people I was going out, who with, and where we were going in case anything happened. After we agreed on a local coffee shop, the tone turned again, and he started making all these assumptions, and I had to tell him several times that no, I would not sleep with him straight away. The final straw came when he started texting saying that we should run away together, and that he was going to take me away, and we could elope. Just as I am formulating a text to send back to him in reply to the "I want to whisk you away" message, my phone pings and I get a message from him telling me that he has rope and duct tape in the back of his car, ready for us to use. I noped out of there real quick. I stopped replying to his messages, blocked him, and then reported his profile through Tinder. I wasn't sure what else to do about the situation aside from that, but I made sure that anyone I knew who was using Tinder, I told them about this guy, so if he came up they knew not to match with him. I was swiping through Bumble, trying to find someone who didn't start their bio with "just looking for a partner in crime" or "fluent in sarcasm." After a few days of swiping, I matched with a guy named Eric. He was cute, dark hair, glasses, kind of nerdy in a charming way, and his profile said he loved horror movies, which is my favorite genre. We started chatting and hit it off pretty quickly. He was funny and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, which is rare, you know. After a week of texting back and forth, he suggested we go see a movie together. "There's this new indie horror film playing at the small theater downtown," he said. "It's supposed to be really creepy." I agreed because it sounded like the perfect first date. Public place, shared interest, low pressure. What could go wrong, right? We met at the theater that Friday night. Eric looked just like his photos, which was a relief, and he seemed nice enough. A little awkward maybe, but aren't we all? He'd already bought the tickets, which I thought was sweet, and we got popcorn and drinks before heading into the theater. The place was small, only about 30 seats, and it was nearly empty. There were maybe 3 other people scattered around. Eric suggested we sit in the back row, which I didn't think much of at the time. I mean, who doesn't like the back row? The movie started, and it was good, really atmospheric and tense. But about 20 minutes in, I started to notice something odd. Eric wasn't really watching the movie. He kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. At first, I thought maybe he was just nervous and trying to gauge if I was enjoying myself. But as the movie went on, it got weirder. He wasn't just glancing anymore. He was staring. Like full on, head turned toward me, staring. I could feel his eyes on me, and it was making my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it and focus on the movie, but then he leaned in close and whispered, "You're really pretty." Okay, not the creepiest thing to say, but the way he said it, it felt off. His voice was too quiet, almost like he was talking more to himself than to me. I forced a smile and said, "Thanks," then turned back to the screen, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. A few minutes later, he leaned in again. This time he whispered, "You're exactly how I imagined you." I froze. Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. What do you mean?" I whispered back, trying to keep my voice light. He smiled, a small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know. You're just perfect. Like I knew you would be." At this point, I was officially freaked out. I laughed nervously and said something like, "That's sweet," then turned my attention back to the movie and prayed he'd stop talking. But he didn't. He just kept staring at me. And then he did something that made my heart start racing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook. He opened it and started flipping through the pages, his eyes darting between the notebook and me. I couldn't see what was written in it, but I noticed that the pages were filled with handwriting, tiny, cramped letters that covered every inch of paper. He stopped on one page, smiled to himself, and then looked back at me. "You're just like I wrote," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What?" I asked, my voice shaking now. He held up the notebook, but he didn't let me see what was in it. "I've been writing about you for weeks," he said. "Ever since I saw your profile. I knew we'd meet." At this point, my fight-or-flight instincts were kicking in, and I was leaning heavily toward flight. "Eric, that's really intense," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think I'm going to step outside for a minute." I grabbed my bag and stood up, but before I could slip past him, he grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to make me stop. "Wait," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need to tell you something." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He leaned in close, so close that I could feel his breath on my ear. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to pull my wrist free. He let go of my wrist and sat back in his seat, smiling like nothing had happened. "You'll see," he said, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the theater. "It's almost over." I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I bolted out of the theater, my heart racing, and didn't stop until I was outside in the parking lot. I looked around, half expecting him to follow me, but he didn't. The theater was quiet, and the other cars in the lot were empty. I got in my car and drove home, shaking the entire way. I blocked Eric on Bumble, deleted the app, and spent the rest of the night locked in my apartment with all the lights on. The creepiest part? I looked up the movie later to see how it ended, and apparently, the last scene takes place in a dark movie theater. A woman is sitting in the back row when a man leans in and whispers something to her. She turns to him, and he's holding a notebook filled with her name, written over and over again. I'm one of those people that's had the misfortune to have a few creepy encounters in my life. I've been fortunate enough to come away unscathed from each of them. So there's that. I decided to make this the primary and first post I've ever made because I think this was as close to being hurt as I'd ever been, and I am eternally grateful that it turned out okay. This was a few years ago when I was an undergrad, and I lived in an apartment just a few blocks from university. A trolley would come round to pick up students from our apartment complex. I first noticed him at my stop. I had never noticed him before, but I noticed that he was very attractive, sort of rocker style with tattoos and shoulder-length hair. I didn't think much more of it, just boarded the trolley, and put in my earbuds listening to music as I drifted off into thoughts about class. I was staring out the window, but when I turned my head back, I saw him sitting across from me, and he was looking at me with a smile. I politely smiled back and quickly looked back out the window. He was very attractive, and I got bashful. I kept my eyes out the window the rest of the ride, which wasn't very far. The way he had looked at me just gave me butterflies. I got up to get off at my stop, and he got up as well. I started walking to class, but he walked right up next to me and tapped me on the shoulder. I sort of jumped, turned, and he was smiling. I could see his lips moving. I took my earbuds out. "I'm sorry, my music." He just grinned. In a thick French accent, he said, "Hello. I saw you on the trolley. I find you exceptionally beautiful." My cheeks caught fire as I stuttered out a thank you. He told me he would like to take me on a date. I agreed, and we decided on drinks that next night downtown, which was walking distance from my apartment. He asked for my phone number, which I gave to him. He texted me only a couple hours later telling me he was thinking of how beautiful I was and couldn't stop thinking about me. He said this in various ways a few times the rest of the day. I found it flattering, but it was a little intense looking back. I dunno, I just assumed it was his culture. Either way, I didn't find it that weird. At 3 a.m. he texted again, "Can't wait for our date." I did find this a little weird being 3 in the morning, but again gave him the benefit of the doubt. I didn't have school or work the next day, so I got up early to take a morning run down by the river. I should mention here that I lived right near the trolley stop, I mean literally 50 feet from it, in a ground floor apartment. My patio door opened right out onto the lawn, and where the river runs, so as I stepped out I could see the trolley stop just diagonal to me. Before you think I'm too much of an idiot, I had requested a second or third level apartment being that I lived alone as a female, but they did not have any available, and I was on a waiting list for the first one. Anyway, as I stepped out I saw him and a couple other people standing at the trolley stop. He also saw me and I waved back at him. He waved me over. As I walked up, he said something a little weird. Now I know where my muse lives. I just smiled awkwardly. He then offered to walk by and pick me up for our date, since he lived in the apartment complex. I agreed. I told him I was headed off for a run, said goodbye. I was still not getting any real weird vibes at this point. He watched me run off. That night I got the knock on my door. I opened the door, and he immediately tried to push his way in, but I just stepped out on the porch before he could get through. He gave me a weird look, but then smiled and pecked my cheeks. I immediately noticed liquor on his breath, but brushed it off thinking he might have been nervous. We walked the short distance into town, and he asked what I was majoring in. I thought I heard him scoff when I answered biology, but when I looked at him, he was smiling. At the wine bar, he ordered for us, which I didn't mind, him being most likely better versed in the subject. He started asking me a lot of questions, but would interrupt as I answered, which again I just found slightly rude and chalked it up to cultural differences. Looking back now, I think he was probably tipsy. I found out that he wrote for the arts and culture section of the local newspaper. I recognized his name. He was a writer and attending university for a master's degree in journalism. We had some of this in common. I am also a writer, mostly poetry and short stories, but I was also an intern writer for the arts section of the university paper. As the date went on, I noticed a lot of strange behavior. For one, he gulped his wine rather than sipped. He would have about 3 glasses to my 1. This was a red flag. As I said, he was already drinking when he arrived, so I immediately noticed that there could be an alcohol abuse problem here, which I'm fairly sensitive to since both of my parents are recovering alcoholics. I don't want none of that, so despite how attractive I found him, and how serendipitous our commonalities, I was really starting to get turned off. Also, he kept checking his text messages almost every 2 minutes, which I found extremely rude. About 45 minutes into the date, his tone changed a bit too, and he started sort of mocking me and the major that I had chose, saying things like, "Why would an artist like you go into something as mundane as biology?" Which isn't the degree I ended up getting anyway, but I digress. This wasn't said at all in, like, a flattering tone. It was very scoffing and mocking. I was pretty much over the date at this point, but not totally ready to throw in the towel, figuring it might just be the subjects we were on. And please don't judge me, but he was so hot. Uneasy face. I got up to go to the bathroom, and texted my friend from there. At wine bar with the Frenchman, may need exit strategy. We'll be in touch with update in a few. She 10-4 foot D and I headed back, and from the hall, I could see him at the table chugging down another glass of wine. When I got back, he asked if I'd like to go to another place with better atmosphere. I okayed against my better judgment, and we headed out. We walked 2 blocks to a place called the Red Feather, which was pretty much a martini bar. I wasn't really into drinking anymore, but I knew they had some good food, so I figured I could get a snack. There was a line at the door, so we were waiting for a little bit. He kept checking his phone, and when he would look up from his phone, he would lean in for a kiss, and I would kind of back off for a couple of reasons. 1. I don't make out on a first date, and 2. I was not into his clumsy advance. He would just laugh and say sorry, but kept trying to do it, which was really starting to piss me off a bit. When we got in, I told him I didn't want to order any more drinks, but was just going to order a snack. He insisted on ordering 2 martinis despite this. By the time my appetizer arrived, he had finished both of them. I decided it was time to dip out, so while he was texting somebody, again, I texted my friend to give her the update that I would be walking home and to meet me at my apartment in 25 minutes. She also lives in my complex. She asked if I was okay, and I told her yeah, just grossed out. She said okay, that she and her boyfriend were watching a movie and would be over afterwards. No problem. At this point, I decided to just ask the rude Frenchman, who he has been texting the entire night, and that I found it very rude. Again, he just laughed. Then he gave me a very strange look, one that gave me chills. He got very serious and said, "What I think is rude is you're asking into my business." I apologized. Then he said, "But since you want to know, it's a girl that I fucked last night, and she's mad I'm out with you." No smile, no laugh. He was straightforward serious. I sat shocked for a few seconds, half expecting him to laugh. I told him I didn't know what to say. He said, "Don't ask if you can't handle the answer. Besides, obviously I like you better." I was utterly disgusted. I got up and told him that he can tell her that she doesn't have to be jealous because I was leaving. I walked in a fury all the way home, only about 3 blocks. I couldn't believe what a fucking creep I had wasted my last 2 hours on. I got home and slammed the door. In my rage, I ran into my bedroom, typing out my text of disgust to my friend. She texted back that she was so sorry and would be over soon. I changed into my oversized shirt and got on my laptop. About 20 minutes later, I heard someone on my porch at the back door. I figured it was my friend and her boyfriend, since she lives on that side and always comes to that door. A knock on the door. I yelled out, "Just a sec," as I went to throw on some sweatpants. I hadn't done any laundry, so I had to dig through a big pile to find any clean sweatpants, so it was taking a minute. A harder banging on the door. "Oh my God, girl, give me one sec. I can't find my pants," I said, laughing. I heard the door click open, and I realized that I must have forgotten to lock it in my rage. I still wasn't alarmed, I just thought my friend figured it out. That is, until I stood up out of my closet, and the Frenchman was standing at my bedroom door. In absolute horror, I let out shock screech. He did that creepy thing you see in horror movies where a stalker or killer puts his finger up to his mouth and makes a shushing sound. "What the fuck are you doing in my house?" I screamed, my eyes darting back and forth around the room for my phone or a weapon of defense. I could see neither. Panic swept over me. He calmly replied, putting his hands up, "I just want to apologize, please don't yell." I told him to get the EFF out again. He was about 10 feet from me, standing where he was blocking both my exits, the window and the door. I had no idea what to do, but in that moment, my fight or flight response was necessarily both. I decided to bum rush him and run. It didn't work out as planned. He was very muscular, and I was tiny, 5 feet 2 inches. Even with all the momentum I could muster up in 10 feet, it barely moved him, and he ended up just putting me in a bear hug. I tried to scream, but he cupped his hand over my mouth and nose, so that I couldn't breathe. "SHHHHHH," he kept saying. "I just want to say sorry to you." I kept wriggling, but he was just way too strong. I could barely move, even though I was using every ounce of force in my body to try and wriggle out. This went on for about 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I was weakening. He took his hand off my mouth and shoved his tongue into it. I recoiled violently, so he grabbed my head and stuck his tongue into my ear. I was trying to pull away as hard as I could and yelled stop, but he kept going. I tried kneeing him in the balls, but I missed, and this just made him angrier. He sort of let out a growl, and I winced thinking he was going to hit me. Then something surprising happened. Instead of hitting me, he let me go by shoving me backward toward my bed and closet. I fell backward onto my knees. He started to cry. "Why are you so cold?" he was asking, almost whining. "I love you, but you are just so cold." I was in absolute terror, but I was also totally confused by this. I had literally just met him. I just stared up at him, frantically trying to decide what to do next. My couch was right by my bedroom door, and he stepped back and sat on the armrest and just stared at me with tears in his eyes. I decided I was going to try and book it past him. Just as I flinched to jump up, there was a knock on my back door. "Help!" I screamed as loud as I have ever screamed in my life. My friend and her boyfriend burst in, looking totally confused. The Frenchman was already booking it out my front door. I was screaming frantically, and my friend's boyfriend went booking after him. My friend was freaking out, asking me what the hell was going on. I was so frantic I was just grabbing her and crying and screaming. She just dialed the police and told them she thought I was raped. Her boyfriend came back, but said the Frenchman had run into the wooded area of the park and he had lost him. When the police arrived, I told them that I had not been raped, but was definitely assaulted. I did not know what apartment he was in, but gave them his name and what I knew. Turns out, he had a couple DUIs and he was charged with assault. I didn't ever see him again, though I had this terrible fear that I would run into him, even though he was evicted. I never felt safe in that apartment, and I moved out 2 weeks later to a whole different complex. My friend stayed the night every night until I moved. I am so amazingly grateful that I had texted my friend to come over. I shudder to think about what may have happened if she and her boyfriend had not shown up right when they did. It almost makes me sick to contemplate. This happened a few months ago in the beginning of summer. I've held off on sharing it for so long because I didn't want to be judged for my actions, lol. I joined a stupid online dating app. I was divorced last winter. Just kind of living it up, you know? I somehow matched with this man who lived in New York, 8-hour drive from me. After texting for a few weeks, he sprung it on me that he was going to drive to see me. Since I'm staying with family, since my divorce, I decided we'd get a hotel. He told me to find one, and he'd pay for it. I already felt super bad he was driving so far, so I was trying to find deals and the cheapest place that wasn't sketchy as fuck. I live about 45 minutes outside of the city in the state that I live in, and I'm not super familiar with some areas, so the hotel I booked ended up being no bueno. But I didn't know this until I got there. It was dark by the time I arrived after getting lost 4 times. There was a very shady motel across the street with 2 men smoking cigarettes on the porch. Lots of trucks/truckers traveling through. I was just walking into the hotel like, shit. I fucked up. But I just went with it anyway because I didn't really have a choice in New York. What we'll refer to him as was about an hour away, so he'd be there soon. The hotel was run by Jamaicans. I think a family, but this comes into play later, which is why I mention it. The woman who checked me in was nice, but the place threw off weird vibes. The lighting, the smell of bleach, the carpet, I don't know. It was really bright, but also really dark, if that makes sense. I started shaking as I was trying to check in. The reservation was under NY's name, and at first she told me she couldn't find the reservation. His last name was Spanish, so I thought maybe I was pronouncing it wrong even though I'm pretty good with Spanish. This made it awkward, because now she knew I was meeting a stranger. I thought maybe he gave you the wrong name, she had said. I nervously chuckled. She put me on the 2nd floor, and I was expecting an elevator, but as I turned I saw that behind me was a huge carpeted staircase. This threw me off too. I don't know why. I get to my room and just pace around waiting for this stranger from the internet to show up. It starts raining. I'm sitting by the window sipping a glass of wine and see a pickup truck pull it. I think maybe it's him. A man in a black hoodie gets out and locks his truck about 50 beeps and runs inside. I start panicking thinking it's him, and he has no bags or luggage because he's just going to come kidnap me or something. Then there's a loud knock at my door, and I jump so hard and immediately stand up. I make my way over to the door and look through the peephole. It's New York. No black hoodie carrying bags. So I crack the door and smile, and he comes in, and I share my terrifying thoughts with him, and we chuckle. Sex happens. Later that night we fall asleep, and he's spooning me but also has his arms all the way around me with his head on top of my head. Super weird, I don't know. I was woken from a dead sleep just so sweaty because he was holding me so tightly, and I thought that's what had woken me up, but then I heard it. Someone was fucking with our door. Then I heard the handle start moving as whoever it was tried to open it, but it wouldn't open. Suddenly New York just jumps out of bed. So fast I wondered how long he had been awake listening to this to react so quickly. I pull the covers up to my chin as he's just standing in the dark in his undies looking at the door. He looks through the peephole and says he thinks it's one of the Jamaican men who work here. We had a chain on the door as well as all the locks, so he kept the chain on as he opened it a few inches. Before he could even ask what the dude wanted, this man just says, "Is the white girl in there?" And I remember getting chills all over my body. New York says no and slams the door, almost completely unbothered by this. The man says something about needing a credit card from me. New York yells back that the room is on his card, under his name, and he'll take care of it in the morning. I looked at the clock, and it was like fucking 2 a.m. I turn over and just stare at the wall hoping to fall back asleep. New York wraps his arms around me again and is immediately snoring in my ear. Good thing he was hot. The next morning we decide to go get breakfast. It's super early and we're both feeling groggy. I'm hoping as we round the corner to the stairs that no one is at the front desk because they definitely heard the noises from our room this morning and I was feeling really embarrassed. Thankfully the front desk was empty. Then I saw him, an older black male, standing a few feet from the exit. I honestly don't know if he was Jamaican. I don't know if he was part of the family who owned this place, or a guest, or just someone else. I don't know, but his face was almost sunken in, and he had this weird, chilling look in his eyes. He was staring right at me. I knew without seeing him this was the guy from last night. New York whispers for me to just keep walking, so I break eye contact with this guy and lean into New York as we make our way to the exit. As we pass, the male is silent. Then as I'm pushing open the door to exit the building, he starts saying, "There's the white girl." I found the white girl. She makes a lot of noise. And New York snorted. I was terrified. I left for work after breakfast. I was gone a few hours and returned to the hotel to find the room empty. I texted New York and asked where he was, and he texted back saying he was in the laundry room and that he'd be right back up. I sat down on the bed waiting for him. I heard some footsteps outside the door, the floor creaking, like someone was standing at the door shifting their weight or something. I figured maybe New York forgot his room key, so I got up to look through the damn peephole, but it was not him. The creepy man was standing outside the door, just staring into the peephole. I jumped back and started crying, and called New York and yelled for him to come to the room quickly because the man was outside the door. He was gone by the time New York ran up. He went down to the front desk and spoke to the woman about this man, but she just kept saying she had no idea who he was talking about and that she will keep an eye out for him. That night I couldn't sleep. I just felt like I could feel him lingering around outside the door, but I was too scared to go look. New York was sleeping. I rolled over and decided to be the big spoon and wrap my arms around him. He was still basically a stranger, but was the most comforting thing I had. We checked out the next morning. I grabbed his hand as we made our way down the stairs because guess who was standing there? Yep. The woman from the front desk was gone, though, replaced by a younger male. The creepy man was smiling as we neared the bottom of the stairs. Just this awful bone-chilling grin. "Lucky man with that white girl," was the last comment we heard from this creep. New York spun around and told him to fuck off, and then walked me to my car. He waited while I drove off to make sure no one followed me. I don't know, maybe there's more we could have done. But again, he never did anything. It was just a very unnerving experience. About a month later I was telling my dad about it, and he laughed and told me I had picked the worst part of the city, and that he thought he had heard about this place being shut down multiple times for either drugs or sex trafficking. I can't remember, and then it would go under new ownership. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either until like the third month of using it when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said that I would take the drive to go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt she was who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week and called most days. I just assumed I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there, though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was, and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she sent me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I had chalked this all up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came onto an old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to go knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from one of the second floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile, and even gave me a kiss which surprised, and I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise or?" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said that we had to get out of there now. We both ran out to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I had seen the guy last. He was looking at us from out the window again. I got a better look of him, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that While they didn't find anyone, they did find that the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure the house was empty. After the cops left, Katie asked me to stay the night, because she was scared to be in her house alone right now. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch as Katie's bed was the room next to the one the man had been in. Katie had also brought out the shotgun that her father had given her, but she never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she insisted, saying she'd feel safer if we had it out. I'm glad she did. Later that night I was still wide awake, watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen I had the sound of a doorknob being turned. At this point I wasn't even scared, I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked the door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what happened and called the police yet again. When they arrived they did a sweep of the woods and found no one yet again. They told Katie and me that it'd probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house, and I was going home. I left a little after Katie did. I was on the phone with my brother telling him about what happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. That fucking man was standing at corner of the house, just watching me. I gunned it out of there and didn't even bother calling the police again. But I did text Katie, and she said she was going to call them again. I don't think Katie ever even went back to that house alone. He seemed normal. Normal in the kind of way that makes you relax a little. His pictures were unpretentious. One of him hiking, one with a dog, not even his dog, he admitted, which somehow made him seem more honest, and one of him at a backyard barbecue with friends. He had a decent bio, too, big fan of horror movies, local coffee shops, and trying to cook things I see on TikTok. We started chatting, and he wasn't pushy or weird. He'd ask me about my favorite movies, shared his love of bad 80s slasher flicks, and even joked about how he was probably a terrible cook despite all his TikTok attempts. After a couple of days of texting, he suggested we meet for dinner. I know this great little spot, he said. Quiet, cozy, really good food. You'll love it. I agreed. Honestly, I was kind of excited. It had been a while since I'd gone on a date with someone who seemed this normal. We set a time for Thursday evening, and he sent me the address. It wasn't a restaurant I'd heard of before, but I figured it was just one of those off-the-beaten-path places. Thursday rolled around, and I showed up at the address he'd given me. It wasn't a restaurant. It was a house. I double-checked the message to make sure I hadn't misread it. Nope, this was definitely the address. It was a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where you'd expect to see kids playing in the yard or someone mowing their lawn. But the yard was empty, and the house looked off. The curtains were drawn, and there were no lights visible from the outside. It felt too dark for 7 p.m. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over my phone, debating whether to text him. Before I could decide, the front door opened, and James stepped outside, smiling. "Hey, you made it," he said, waving me toward the house. I forced a smile and got out of my car, clutching my bag a little tighter than usual. "I thought we were meeting at a restaurant," I asked, trying to keep my voice light. James laughed. "Oh yeah, sorry if that was confusing. This is actually my friend's place. He's an amazing chef, and he runs this sort of underground dining thing. Totally exclusive. I thought it'd be fun to do something different." I hesitated. Something about this felt weird, but he was so casual about it, like this was the most normal thing in the world. And I didn't want to be rude or overthink it. Maybe this was just one of those cool, quirky experiences people talk about later. So I smiled, nodded, and followed him inside. The house was strange. The entryway was clean, almost too clean, like it was staged for an open house. There was no clutter, no personal touches, no photos, no shoes by the door, nothing. It smelled faintly of bleach, which I told myself was just because the owner liked things tidy. James led me down a short hallway into the dining room. The dining room was set up like a restaurant, kind of. There were 2 small tables, each with a white tablecloth, a single candle, and a chair on either side. One of the tables was already set with plates and silverware. The other was empty. The walls were bare, and the only light came from the candle and a dim overhead fixture. "This is nice," I said, trying not to sound as uncomfortable as I felt. James pulled out a chair for me and gestured for me to sit. "It's super low-key, I know," he said. "But trust me, the food is incredible." My friend's been doing this for a while. He only takes a few guests at a time. I sat down, glancing around the room. It felt too quiet. I couldn't hear anything. No voices, no music, not even the sound of a kitchen. "Where's your friend?" I asked. "Oh, he stays in the back," James said, waving it off. "He doesn't like to be disturbed while he's cooking. It's like his process." Before I could respond, he disappeared into the kitchen. I heard him call out, "I'll grab us some wine," and then silence. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring at the candle and trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the whole thing felt wrong. The house was too quiet, too clean, too empty. And where was this friend James had mentioned? Finally, I stood up, deciding I'd just thank him for the invite and leave. But as I turned to go, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The empty table in the corner, it wasn't completely empty. There was something on the floor beneath it. I stepped closer, squinting in the dim light. It was a shoe, a single women's shoe. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed something else, a faint, dark stain on the floor near the table. It was small, almost like someone had tried to clean it up, but hadn't quite managed to get it all. "Everything okay?" James's voice came from behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of red wine. He was smiling, but his eyes looked different now. Sharper, hungrier. Yeah, I stammered. I think I left something in my car. I'll be right back." I tried to step past him, but he didn't move. "You're not leaving already, are you?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "We haven't even eaten yet." My voice cracked, and I forced a laugh. "I just need to grab my phone. I'll be right back." His smile widened, but he still didn't move. "You don't need your phone," he said. "You're here to enjoy yourself, right? No distractions." I took a step back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "James, That's when I heard it. A faint noise coming from somewhere deeper in the house. It was soft, muffled, but unmistakable. A woman's voice. She was crying. I didn't wait to hear more. I shoved past James with all my strength, nearly knocking the wine glasses out of his hands, and bolted for the front door. I didn't look back, didn't stop running until I was in my car with the doors locked. As I sped away, I saw James standing on the porch, watching me. He wasn't smiling anymore. I called the police as soon as I got home, but when they went to check the house, it was empty. No tables, no plates, no stains on the floor. Just an ordinary vacant house. They told me the place had been on the market for months. This happened about 15 years ago. At the time, I was dating around, and I had a few creepy encounters during that time, but this guy takes the cake. He was an acquaintance my brother had met at a bar a few times, and was showing around the local area because he was new to the country. My brother set us up because he was apparently desperate for a girlfriend, and I guess I was pretty desperate too, because we went on a date together. That date was probably the worst first date I've ever been on. I showed up to the restaurant we were meeting at. He was late, which isn't a huge deal, so I let it slip, and we went to sit down. To be honest, I knew from the start I wasn't really attracted to him, but I thought I would be polite and see if we had a nice night. He started off politely too. He held the door for me, pulled my seat out. It wasn't really necessary, but it was nice anyway. Then, when we were sitting down waiting for someone to come and take our orders, I was reading the menu, and he started talking about how much his fiancée would have liked this place. That took me by surprise, and naturally I asked about his fiancée. He revealed that he had had a fiancée before moving over her, but he had just left her to move to another country. I asked why they had broken up, and he said they never really broke up as such, but he got fed up of her nagging him about various things and just moved away. I really didn't know what to say after that, so I changed the subject and started asking him more about himself and where he used to live. He wasn't really very forthcoming. Eventually, our waiter turned up and started talking to us. To clarify for the next part, our waiter was a man of color, and he had an unusual accent for our area. So my date stares blankly at him for a while, then turns to me and says, "You understand this guy?" I said that yes, I could understand him, before telling him our orders. After he left, my lovely date continued to shock me. He said, "I wouldn't normally leave ordering to the lady, but that brown guy talked really weirdly, and I didn't get it." Wow, way to tell me you're a racist and a sexist in one breath, dude. Again, I was speechless for a few moments before I got angry with him. I don't remember exactly what I said. It was something along the lines of, Well, I'm not a lady, so I can order for myself just fine, thanks. And why make racial remarks? Then he got annoyed with me and told me he wasn't being racist. He just wasn't used to that kind of person where he was from. I pointed out that he wouldn't have met me if he just stuck to people he was used to in his own country. He did calm down then and told me he wouldn't want that because he's glad he met me. Honestly, I found that a little weird, given that I didn't see any way to say that this date was going well and he didn't know me very well at all. But I decided since we had ordered, I should stay, get my meal, and try to redeem the evening before I leave and never see this man ever again. So I answered some of his questions about me, basic getting to know me and small talk stuff for the most part, then started on about my previous dates, if I was a virgin, whether I would be willing to wait until marriage, and then be submissive to my husband or not. It was at this point I realized that I was most likely on a date with a religious bigot, hence the misogyny, weird attitude to sexual stuff, and all his other closed-minded bullshit. So I settled for a none of your business. Now I need to leave. I checked the prices on the menu and left money for my half of the food, plus a tip, on the table, and got up to leave. He said he didn't see why I was being unreasonable with him, as though this had been a normal date, but then told me that I couldn't expect him to take my money, because that was an insult to him. Fine, dude, you want to pay for a meal that's not getting eaten, you pay for it. I'm not that mad about spending my money that I'll stop you. So I took my money back and walked straight out. I just assumed that, yes, it was an awful evening, but I wouldn't have to see him again. I wasn't even back to my house when my brother started texting me, asking where I was because my date had called him in tears saying I had gone off for no reason, and he didn't know where I was or what to do. Thankfully, my brother was pretty calm about it and assumed that I had left for a reason. I explained everything to him, and he was pretty surprised too. After that night, we both tried to cut contact. My brother stopped meeting up with the guy, and we both blocked the Facebook account we had for him too. My brother also blocked his number because he would not stop texting him asking about me, alternating between being really worried about me to saying he hoped I dropped dead. Then he started making endless different accounts on social media to harass us. He told my brother he didn't know why we weren't talking to him. He posted a bunch of weird posts describing me in detail before going on to call me a lot of horrible names. We kept blocking them and moving on. Then the harassment got worse. He either found me and followed me at some point, or got my address from a friend and turned up one day, standing around outside my house, asking to come in and speak to me. When I refused to let him in, he grabbed my arm to prevent me from going in either, and started to tell me that he didn't want to let me go because I would never find a man who would love me like he did, and that if I walked away from him again, I would regret it one day when I was old and lonely. He went on and on like this for ages and ages while I tried to pull my arm away from him, before I got fed up of this and yelled at him to get off me and leave me alone, then kicked him in the shin. He let go of my arm but cursed at me and said I was being ungrateful to him, but I took my opportunity to run inside and lock my door. He started banging on my door, then trying to push it inwards. I was getting both upset by this man and just super fed up of his presence in my life. So I grabbed my phone and called the police, telling them that someone was trying to get into my house. I was told someone would be with me soon, but 20 to 30 minutes later there was no sign of them anywhere, and I was getting quite upset because this man was forcing my door, and I thought the lock was going to break soon. So I called my brother, who lives nearby, just because I knew he would come, even though I wasn't sure if he would be able to help much. About 15 minutes later, my brother turns up, and after a brief conversation I didn't quite hear outside, the pressure was gone off the door. I waited a few minutes and then texted my brother to see what was going on, and if it would be alright to look outside now. He didn't reply, and the next thing I heard was the police turning up. I went out to see what was going on. Apparently after my initial call, they had received another call from a neighbor saying there were two men fighting on my lawn. I guess this was my brother and the guy, since my brother looked out of breath and pretty shook up, and the guy wasn't around anymore. My brother explained to the police that he had tried to stop the man getting into my house, and then the man had hit him. I told my side of the story, and some of my other neighbors were asked what they had seen, and were able to tell them about his attempts to get in. Plus there were marks on the outer side of the door where he had tried repeatedly to get in. The police went to look for him, and a few weeks afterward I was called and told they thought they had found him, but when they wanted me to look at the suspected person, it wasn't the same man. I didn't hear anything else, and I don't know what happened to him. I didn't see him again, and so I'm probably safe after 15 years. Regardless, I don't ever want to see him again. So the final part of this story happened in 2008. I met my first serious boyfriend when I was 15 in secondary school, 2005. We ended up being together for about 2.5 years. We were in the same year, myself being only 3 months older than him. We clicked with each other's friend groups, so everyone tended to hang out with no issues. A few months into the relationship, some small red flags started to appear. Another guy tried talking to me, to which my boyfriend threatened him. This landed him in detention, as it happened in school time. This was the first of many times I saw a very scary side of him. Other occurrences that weren't massive, but in hindsight, they really were, was him smashing his bedroom window because I didn't want to go and get drunk one night, him throwing drinks over me, and when he started to rear his ugly side, even more, he pinned me against a wall because one of his friends sat next to me on a sofa at a party. Thankfully, his friends pulled him off of me and gave him a bit of a talking to, but it was put down to just too much drink and forgotten about. So time goes by and we briefly split up because he was taking a lot of drugs, mainly ecstasy and speed. I didn't really want to be doing all of that, meaning we spent a lot less free time together, so I called it a day. We were apart for about a month before getting back together, in which time I had been casually chatting with someone else, which didn't go anywhere. One morning when we were still in bed, he had a text from a local friend and went to meet them, leaving me in bed at his house. His mom, stepdad, and sister were out. So after about 5 minutes I got up and went to use the bathroom when I heard his car screech to a halt outside. I could hear his front door fling open and smash the wall and him pounding up the stairs. I could hear him breathing very heavily, like he was almost growling. The bathroom door was locked. It was a wooden, so it didn't take him much time to smash it through. He screamed at me about how I had been talking to someone whilst we were split up, and how could I, despite the fact he was hooking up with someone else in his friend's circle. I explained it was only texting, and that we were split up, but that fell on deaf ears. He went on to rip my vest top strap and rip my boots, Ugg boot type things that went up to the knee, and then told me to get out and walk home, which was about 5 miles away. I live in the UK in a very quiet area. There tends to be a small village, then like a mile stretch of quiet road, then another village, then a mile stretch of road, and so on. So I'm walking back on the first part of quiet road with my top hanging off of me, and my boots flapping all over the place as they'd been ripped, when I hear his car. He had a Saxo VTR with a telltale shitty loud exhaust. There was no way I was dealing with him again, so I jumped over a hedge and hid. I remember getting scratched up from the brambles, but I didn't care. I just crouched behind this hedge hoping he'd just disappear. I heard his car drive up and down that road a few times before he gave in, and I figured it was safe. I ignored all of his calls and luckily made it home safe, running most of the way. I received messages from him apologizing and telling me how he'd kill himself, etc., but I just didn't care at that point. After some time he finally left me alone, and I just concentrated on college and spending time with friends. I really wish that was the end of my interactions with him, but it wasn't. I was on a night out in the local town with my friends. I had put my ex to the back of my mind, as it had been months now without hearing anything or seeing him. There I was minding my own business, dancing away, when he just appears out of nowhere. He tries to talk, to which I acknowledge, but I'm really not in the mood for it. So I go to the toilets near the exit and decide how to handle this. One of my friends was working at the local Asda that night, and I knew they finished in about an hour, so I decided that I'd leave the club and walk to Asda and wait for them to get off. I knew it'd only take about 15 to 20 minutes to get there. In hindsight, this was a fucking stupid idea, but I just wanted to get away from him. I peer out of the toilet, and although it's busy I can't see him. So far so good. I quickly run to the cloakroom and hand in my ticket to get my coat back, shove it on, and get out the door. There were people outside smoking and just hovering about chatting. I glanced around as I walked through and didn't see him, so figured it was fine for me to dash off. About 10 minutes into my walk I start to feel uneasy. I don't know why. I'm just full of dread. I turn around and about 30 feet behind me is my ex. Following me, eyes locked on me, not saying a word. He looks evil. He must have been waiting for me to come out of the toilets or clocked me getting my coat and kept a distance behind me the whole time. So it's past 12 a.m. The roads are dead because of the time. There's no nearby houses. I realize in this moment just how badly I fucked up. I text my friend quickly, telling her what's happening, where I am, where I'm going to, etc. She tries to call, but I cancel it as I don't want him knowing I've alerted people to whatever this situation is going to turn into. I pick up the pace and can hear that he does too. Ahead of me, like out of a fucking horror movie, is the underground pass. It's a walkway that goes under the main road and brings you out into the Asda car park. I had to either run through this 100-yard dimly lit tunnel or turn around and face him. I decided fuck it and sprinted through the tunnel. After all, Asda was open on the other side. There would for sure be someone in the car park. They had a 24-hour petrol station and a cash point, etc., which many people use. So I bolted through. This is when he starts shouting abuse at me. You fucking this, you fucking that. The usual. I get through the tunnel and am so relieved to finally see Asda all lit up, knowing that people are inside. I notice a youngish guy on a moped not too far from the entrance. I let my guard down, figuring that I'd be left alone now someone else is visible, but I was wrong. So very wrong. The next thing I know, I'm being grabbed by my hair. He takes my phone out of my hand and smashes it on the floor. I start shouting and the moped guy sees us and legs it into the store. Great. So Crazy X here starts pulling me backwards towards the underpass, and I start noping and panicking real hard. If he gets me in that underpass, I'm screwed. So with all my might I swing up and punch him as hard as I could in the face. It was then I remembered he still had a hold of my hair as he ripped a clump of it out. He grabs me again, picking me up by the throat only to throw me to the floor, cutting up my knees and hands. He's now screaming at me, calling me a fucking bitch for hitting him. At this point I start to hear shouting, and to my relief it's getting closer. The guy on the moped had alerted staff to the situation outside, and a variety of people were running out towards us. A security guard, staff members, and even a customer. My ex started to run but was caught. The staff in Asda had rang the police, who were on their way. I saw my friend and just collapsed into her arms like a baby. The police were there about 5 minutes later. They arrested him and took me to the station to make a statement. They had to take photos of all my injuries, all inflicted by someone I once loved. Bruises, grazes, cuts, a patch of missing hair. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. I remember the police officer trying to lighten the mood by joking about me managing to punch him at least. What happened after was all a blur. I shut myself away and developed bad anxiety and panic attacks due to everything that happened. I remember an officer visiting me telling me about a court date. I didn't attend. In hindsight I should have, but I couldn't face him and those evil eyes. I didn't want to remember the fear I felt looking at him. I just wanted it to all go away. It was in the local paper that week, details of his court date, etc. I was told that he'd been put in an anger management program and had started counseling. He was forced to face what he was, which I'm glad of, as he was a monster. Even though I haven't seen him, I wish never to again.